Hello everyone and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, hello and welcome to today's Sutta class. Also, this is the first Sutta class I'm doing on the channel this year. So, Happy New Year to everyone. I wish you a very fruitful and happy and inspiring New Year with a lot of good experiences in your practice. And since this is the first talk of this year, I wanted to take this opportunity to reflect a little bit together with you on the year that has passed. The new year is already 10 days old, so probably you have made a lot of New Year's resolutions, and since it's already 10 days, probably you have broken them already. So today I just want to talk about making resolutions and also about reflecting about our practice in the year that has just passed. So traditionally, obviously, this time of the year is a time of introspection, a time of reflection, not only in Buddhism, but also generally in the world, in other religions. When one cycle ends and a new cycle begins, then often human beings, we use this as a reference point to just look back and think about what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we improve, what do you want to change in the future, what are our goals, our aspirations for the time that is coming. What can we learn from the past and what do we want to change in the future? And so in the suttas, the Buddha said quite a few times that it is important to evaluate our practice from time to time. And of course, the question is, what does it mean from time to time? Some people have the habit of evaluating themselves every 5 minutes and then beating themselves up because they feel they haven't changed in the last 5 minutes. Their practice hasn't made any progress. Some people, when they sit down in meditation, and then whatever anger arises or greed arises or something arises, and then they feel totally dejected because it hasn't changed yet and they're not enlightened yet. And then they bash themselves and beat themselves up. And of course, if your meditation is so agitated and so unrestful, then obviously you're never going to get anywhere. So evaluating yourself every 5 minutes obviously is too much, but evaluating yourself every 5 years might not be enough, because 5 years is a long period of time. And if your practice goes in the wrong direction for 5 years, you have wasted a lot of time. So in Buddhism, it's very important that at reasonable intervals, we evaluate ourselves. Because obviously, everybody has to purify their own mind. Everybody has to develop wholesome qualities for themselves. Other people cannot do that for us. So our teacher can only be a guide, or the Buddha or the suttas can only be a guide. But eventually, we have to do the practice ourselves, and only we can see if we're making progress. Unless obviously we have a teacher that has some kind of psychic powers and can read our mind. But I think not too many people have those kind of teachers nowadays. And also, even then, sometimes people who look at us from the outside can misjudge us, can misperceive our behavior, can think that we have intentions that are different from the intentions that we actually have. So ultimately, we ourselves have to see if we are making progress in the practice or not. And so for monastics, reflecting on their life and reflecting on their behavior is a very regular part of their practice. And Usually monastics in monasteries, they do chanting every day, where they do these kind of reflections and think about their life and the way they are leading the life and the practice, the way the practice is going, the way their mental development is going, and whether or not they are moving in the right direction. But obviously monastics have made a very, very strong commitment to the practice. They have dedicated their entire life to the practice. They're fully focused on hopefully doing not too much else, but trying to develop wholesome qualities, not necessarily in meditation all the time, but obviously just this is the main focus of their life. So for them, it is a very regular practice to reflect every single day about the way their life is going. For lay people, doing this every day is maybe a little bit too much. Maybe people don't have that much time, or because there's so much going on in lay life, probably not too much changes in the mental development from day to day. So for lay people, maybe you can do it every month or do it at least every year, reflecting back on the year that has passed, thinking about how you have developed, what the good things that you did in the year, the bad things that you might want to change in the future, things in your practice that you've tried out that worked out well and that you want to continue, things that you've tried out that didn't work out well that you might want to change. Just checking in and seeing if your life is going in the right direction, and if not, if you can make adjustments. And so the most popular sutta, one that is recited almost every day in many monasteries, is called the Papajita Abhinna Sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. And this is what we are going to look at today. This contains 10 reflections that monastics do every single day, or if not every day, then very regularly, to reflect on their life. As I mentioned, it's called the Papajita Abhinna Sutta, but it's actually a little bit more well-known under the name Dasa Dhamma Sutta because it contains Dasa Dhamma, 10 points of reflection. And in many of the popular chanting books, it's called the Dasa Dhamma Sutta, even though the proper name actually is the Papajita Abhinna Sutta. So I have put a link in the live chat to this sutta. It's Anguttara Nikaya 1048. I have put a link to Bhante Suchatto's translation, and this is what we are going to read. But I have also brought this little book, which is the Bhikkhu Manual. And this is a little book that is used very much, especially among the Western monastics that belong to the Thai forest tradition, but it's also widely used among Western monastics in general. And it has the same sutta, but the translation is a little bit more loose, less literal. But because it's very, very popular, many of you might have already read this or heard this being chanted, so you might be more familiar with this. And so I thought we could use this one as well and compare the two translations, the two versions. And maybe the points of reflection will become a little bit more clear if we have those two versions. So let's get started. It's a very short sutta, and the Buddha says the following. In Bhante Suchatto's translation, mendicants, one who has gone forth, should often review these 10 things. What 10? Or here in the Dasa Dhamma Sutta from the booklet, the Buddha says, because there are 10 dhammas which should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. What are these 10? So one who has gone forth, obviously this refers to a person who has left the lay life, gone forth from the household life and become a monastic, a monk or a nun. And the Buddha says someone like this should reflect very often on these 10 points. Obviously, these 10 points are not just meant for monks and nuns. Also lay people can reflect on this from time to time. Maybe sometimes you will have to make some minor adjustments because your life is just different. But let's go through them one by one and see what the Buddha has to say. So the first reflection is the following. One who has gone forth should often review this. I have secured freedom from class. Or here in this book, it's, I am no longer living according to worldly aims and values. This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So the first reflection that we should do very often is, I have secured freedom from class, or translated actually a lot more loosely, I am no longer living according to worldly aims and values. So when we live in the world, there are of course certain expectations that are placed on us. There are certain standards that maybe we feel pressured to live up to, or maybe we never even reflect about, and it's just normal that life is that way it is. For example, we have to make money. Making a lot of money is good. Having a lot of material possessions is good. Starting a family, having a large family is good, for example. Or we feel pressured to, we observe people around us, we feel pressure from society to have a certain standard of living, to keep up with the neighbors, or maybe to maintain a certain reputation, all these kind of things. And obviously, as monks and nuns, we have left all this behind. We don't have a house. We don't have many material possessions. We don't have a career. We don't earn money. We don't feel like we have to develop our own personal reputation. We don't have to make advances in a career. We don't have to get higher paying jobs. We don't have to get more status in society. All these are things that we have left behind, because as we reflect on this, we see all this is just impermanent. Eventually, this is not going to give us lasting security. This is not going to give us lasting happiness. And of course, as lay people who are practitioners themselves, these kind of reflections can also be very helpful. Of course, lay people haven't totally left this behind. They still need to make money somehow. They still need to survive somehow. But still, it's a very important reflection, so that we don't get too caught up in all these things that ultimately are just empty, and ultimately we just have to let go of. Either because we lose the things, or at the very latest, when we pass on to our next life, we're going to lose all this, and all the effort that we have put into this is just going to be wasted. So whether we have a good reputation or a bad reputation, whether we have a lot of money or no money, when this life comes to an end, all of this is not going to matter. And so putting a lot of effort into this actually just takes us in the wrong direction. It doesn't take us in the direction of practice. It doesn't take us in the direction of liberation from all these attachments that we have to stuff, or that we have to our own reputation. It just takes us to more sensuality, more craving, having a high status in society, having a lot of money, or striving for a lot of money, or having a good career. All this is just going to inflate our ego, and it's just going to make it a lot more difficult for us to actually focus on our practice and to make progress towards Nibbana. So this is obviously, since it is the first reflection, it's also a very important reflection. And this is a reflection that, as I mentioned, monastics do every day, and lay people also should be doing from time to time. I have secured freedom from class, or I am no longer living according to worldly aims and values. So then there is the second reflection. The second reflection is, in Panchasuchata's translation, my livelihood is tied up with others. Or in this booklet, my very life is sustained through the gifts of others. This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So, at first glance, this seems like a reflection that is more appropriate for monastics than for lay people, because obviously the monastic life, since monastics don't make their own money, they give the gift of Dhamma to the world, and so the world is supporting them by material gifts, by material support to sustain their life. So Monastics survive on donations of food, donations of robes, donations of places to stay, donations of money to support the monastery, and so on. So it seems like this should be a reflection that is somewhat more appropriate to monastics. And of course, for monastics, this is an important consideration. Monastics also are embodiments of the Dhamma because they've given their whole life to the practice. They should be inspiring to the rest of the world. They should be inspiring to the lay people. And they should be role models. So by reflecting in this way, it kind of sets a certain standard for the monastic, and they feel like other people are giving me all this support. So I don't want to disappoint them. I want to make good use of the support. I don't want to waste this. So I'm not going to waste my time here. I'm actually going to try and develop my practice and make good use of this opportunity that I have, and that is very rare and very difficult to get. There are other people who trust me enough to support me, so I don't want to let them down. I'm actually going to do the practice. So for monastics, this reflection is a bit more immediate, a bit more clear, but even for lay people, I think it's very clear that the livelihood is tied up with other people. So when you work, for example, you have to make money, but you're working together with other people. Maybe you're working in a company, maybe you have co-workers, maybe you have clients, you have a boss, or even if you're self-employed, you still probably have clients, you still have people around you. And obviously, life isn't just about making money. A very important part of happiness in life is also the social relationship we have with other people. And most people would find it very, very unpleasant to be, stranded on a lonely island all by yourself and never seeing another person. And so our relationships with other persons or with other people are also very, very important. And the way we treat others and the way other people treat us, the way we build up harmony in our communities, all this is also very important. All this obviously doesn't increase the money that we have, but it does increase the happiness that we have, because having this harmony around us, these harmonious relations with others, doesn't nourish our body, but it nourishes our mind, it nourishes our own well-being, it nourishes our mental health. And so for that reason, in a somewhat different way than monastics, but also for lay people, the livelihood is tied up with others. And of course, the more we can practice metta and friendliness, and the more we can have harmony with others, the easier it will be for us to actually develop wholesome qualities and to make progress in the Dhamma. Then the third point here in Bhante Sujata's translation is, my behavior should be different. Or here in this book, the third point is translated as, I should strive to abandon my former habits. This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So my behavior should be different, or I should strive to abandon my former habits. So probably all or most people who are listening to this recording will not be arahants. So all of us probably still have greed, hatred, and delusion, probably still have the kilesas in the mind. And so obviously the practice is to bit by bit improve our mind, to bit by bit let go of unwholesome mental states and to develop the wholesome mental states. And this takes effort. It doesn't just happen by itself. So here we talk about right mindfulness, we talk about right effort, those two path factors. Really not losing the motivation to practice. Really every day we have to find the energy again to keep on practicing, to not give up, even though the same old defilements are still there. And sometimes it can feel like, oh, I've practiced for such a long time and I'm still getting angry and I still have greed and all these defilements still pop into my mind. But by reflecting in this way, my behavior should be different, or I should strive to abandon my former habits. it just helps us to every day just reflect on it again and find the motivation to keep on striving, and to as we reflect on this and as we look back, we see gradually, obviously, our mind gets cleaner and purer, and our bad habits slowly get abandoned. And basically, this is the practice. It's going to be a slow progress, but it should be a slow and steady progress if we don't lose motivation and if we keep on practicing. Then there is the fourth point here, translated by Bhante Sujato as, I hope there's no reason to blame myself when it comes to ethical conduct. And in the book, it's translated as, does regret over my conduct arise in my mind? This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So I hope there's no reason to blame myself when it comes to ethical conduct, or does regret over my conduct arise in my mind? And again, this is when we reflect every day or from time to time. Sometimes people like to sit down in the evening and think back over the day that just passed. And here we think about our sila, our precepts. Did we keep the precepts? Did any kind of regret arise because we broke them? Maybe hopefully we didn't kill anybody, hopefully we didn't steal anything, but sometimes, especially the speech precepts, might not be that pure. Maybe we have said something that we later regretted it. We didn't think about something properly, so we accidentally lied, or we accidentally used harsh speech or something like this. Or there was this very juicy piece of gossip that we spread all around, and then it created this harmony in our community. And then after we became mindful again and we realized what we did, and now we feel bad about ourselves for doing what we did, for example. So speech precepts are very easy to break if our mindfulness isn't strong. So when we reflect back, then we can see this really wasn't a good idea, and I will try to restrain myself next time. So these kind of situations can happen, but hopefully most of the time when we think back, then we see our sila was pure, and we have no reason to blame ourselves when it comes to ethical conduct. But either way, whether we have reason or not, this is an opportunity to learn. Even if we have reason, then it's good to see that we did something wrong, because only if we see it can we actually change it. Then the next point here, point number 5, is somewhat similar and somewhat different. And in Bhante Sujato's translation, this is, I hope that after examination, sensible spiritual companions don't reproach any aspect of my ethics. Or the translation in the book, could my spiritual companions find fault with my conduct? So again, this is thinking about our own conduct. Was there any aspect of our conduct that maybe wasn't quite as pure as we would like it to be? But here it's not that we ourselves would criticize ourselves, but it is the other people around us, sensible spiritual companions, that look over us and that spend time with us, and then obviously they might see our faults. And this point and the point we just talked about, these talk about two qualities that are very, very fundamental and very, very important on the path. In Pali, they are called hiri and ottappa. Hiri is an internal quality, our own inner conscience, our own inner voice, where we ourselves reflect on our conduct, and then we see what was wholesome, what was unwholesome. And then, of course, we want to develop the wholesome and let go of the unwholesome. And ottappa is when other people see us, other people, wise people, spiritual companions, sensible people, Sometimes it's easier for other people to see our faults than we ourselves. Sometimes we have a blind spot or we don't want to acknowledge that we have this fault. But for other people, it's sometimes quite easy to see that we have a fault there. And so it's obviously it can be very unpleasant to be criticized by other people. But ultimately, obviously, if they tell us that there is a problem, then we have the opportunity to address this and to change. So we should be very grateful when we get feedback from sensible people. Of course, as Dhamma practitioners, we also know that a lot of people out there in the world are full of greed, hatred, and delusion, and getting feedback from them isn't necessarily helpful. Quite often the world will try to deter us from Dhamma practice because Dhamma practice goes against the stream of the world. And so if those silly, delusional people give us feedback and try to detach us from our practice and try to get us to abandon our practice, obviously this is not feedback that we should listen to. And this is not the quality of ottappa that the Buddha talks about. But if sensible spiritual companions, that means people who are also on the path, ideally people who are further developed, further along the path than we are, our teachers, our mentors, if they give us feedback after examination, as the text says, not just randomly, but after examination, after they see what we're doing, after they have investigated what are our motivations, and then they feel that they should offer us some corrections, then that is very helpful for us. And so the Buddha said that those two qualities, hiri and ottappa, so our own inner conscience and getting feedback from others, the Buddha called these two the guardians of the world. And he also made these two the foundational aspect of the practice. So in many of the texts that talk about the gradual training, the first two qualities that the Buddha will talk about are these two, hiri and ottappa. Because if we don't really have an inner sense, and if other people don't talk to us about what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, obviously there's no way we are ever going to develop on the path. Because if we can't differentiate between what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, there's no way to know which direction to walk in. So these two qualities are very fundamental. And these are the two things that we should reflect on here in those qualities, number 4 and number 5. So then the next point, I believe number 6, is I must be parted and separated from all I hold dear and beloved. Or here in this book, it is all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So this is obviously also a very central Buddhist teaching, the teaching of anicca, of impermanence. Eventually, everything that we are attached to, we will have to let go of, whether that is material things or whether that is our own reputation or our own views, or maybe our family, our friends, our parents, our children, our partner. Everything that we attach to will eventually be lost to us, either because the thing breaks, or because we lose it, or because it gets stolen, or because our partner leaves us, or because our own internal experience changes and we're no longer in love with that person, or eventually, at the very least, when we die or when the other person dies and we have to move on to a new life and start over new. So eventually everything is impermanent. And so if we reflect on this properly every single day, then our attachment to those things and to those persons and to those views will be lessened over time, because we see that they don't bring us lasting happiness and they are not ultimately permanent. This is just the things change, and also our own internal experience changes. And as we reflect, we will slowly be able to let go of the attachment that we have to all these things. And obviously that very much reduces our suffering. The suffering we have now even though the thing is still there, we still have suffering because we have anxiety over losing it, but then also the suffering we will have in the future when the time actually comes to be separated. And of course, also ultimately, this will greatly help on our journey to Nibbana, because as we have less attachments, our mind becomes more clear, more pure, our meditation becomes easier, our defilements become less, and it will be a lot easier to eventually become enlightened. So then the next point, number 7, is I am the owner of my deeds and heir to my deeds. So heir as in inheritance, inheriting the consequences of my deeds. Deeds are my womb, my relative, and my refuge. I shall be the heir of whatever deeds I do, whether good or bad. Or here in this book, I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma. Born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So this is, again, a point that not only comes up in the sutta, it comes up in many, many suttas. I am the owner of my karma. Whatever actions I do, whether by body, whether by speech, or only in my mind, only in my thoughts or with my emotions, all these actions have consequences. And so I basically can determine my own fate. I can determine my own future. If I create wholesome causes, then wholesome fruits will come to me, wholesome consequences will come to me. If I plant seeds that are unwholesome, then unwholesome fruits will grow from that. So it's up to me to decide how I want to live my life in the future. If I create a wholesome environment for me now, if my mind develops in a wholesome direction, then it is wholesome things that will come to me in the future. So whether that is the future of this life or when we get reborn, of course, when we get reborn, the mind moves on. And a mind that is full of negativity, full of anger, full of greed, full of hatred, full of delusion, of course, such a mind will be drawn down to a rebirth in a state that has affinities with such mind states. And so such a mind will obviously go down to a plane that is full of suffering, because that mind is already full of suffering. Whereas if the mind is bright and joyful and happy and full of wholesome qualities, full of generosity and joy and wisdom and compassion and friendliness, then obviously that mind will move on to a state where those qualities are dominant, so to a happy rebirth. And so in this way, we are related to our deeds. We are inheriting the consequences from our deeds. We are heirs to our deeds. And also deeds are our refuge. Karma is our refuge, because we can create some form of security for ourselves if we create a lot of wholesome karma, because that will lead us to a good destination. And also, it's not only about the future, obviously also in the present moment. Whatever mind state we are in, we can either harm ourselves or we can protect ourselves. For example, two people can go through exactly the same situation, and one person will be very deeply traumatized by the situation, and another person will be very resilient, depending on the mind states that they have. A person who goes through a difficult time with a mind that is very relaxed and very joyful, very calm and peaceful, will be a lot less impacted by the negativity of the surroundings than a person that is already full of greed, full of anger, full of despair and depression. Of course, when they go through a difficulty, that will sort of impact them a lot more. So by developing our mind in a wholesome way, that also protects us in our everyday life, not only by creating good consequences for the future, but also by protecting us in the moment, the present moment that we are living now. So then the next point is, as the days and nights flit by, What sort of person am I becoming? Or here in this book is, the days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So we've already talked a little bit about impermanence. The days and nights are relentlessly passing. We cannot stop them. Every second that passes is 1 second closer to our death. Eventually death will come. Since the beginning of this Dhamma talk, 35 minutes have already passed. So have we spent this time in a wise way? Have we properly listened to the talk? Have we started reflecting on the teaching? What sort of person are we becoming as the time is passing? Or how well are we spending the time as the days and nights are passing? So have we just wasted all the time doing completely meaningless stuff that is not ultimately leading to happiness, that is not ultimately helping our practice, that has just been invested maybe in empty sensuality or in making money that we're going to lose anyway because death is coming? Has it just been invested in some stupid activity, just spending hours watching random YouTube videos that are entirely meaningless? Or have we actually made some useful use of the time that has passed? So how well are we spending our time? Or as Bhante Sujato says, what sort of person am I becoming? So obviously, if we're just wasting our time, the qualities that we foster is just laziness. Or if we just watching stupid videos on YouTube, then the quality that we foster is delusion and stupidity. So the opposite of wisdom, the opposite of arousing energy, the opposite of being focused and creating meaningful qualities in our mind. So as time passes, are we using this time wisely? Are we becoming a better person? Then the next point is, do I love to stay in empty huts? Or here in the book, do I delight in solitude or not? This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So do I love to stay in empty huts or do I delight in solitude? This is a question of, do we make enough time to really be by ourselves in our life? Why is it important to be by ourselves, to have time where we just focus on our own inner experience? Because obviously, when we are not in solitude, when we are around a lot of people in a very busy environment with a lot of noise and so on, then it's very, very easy for us to lose sense restraint and to get distracted by this and that all the time. And so people are chit-chatting and our mind is drawn outwards and the mind isn't able to actually focus on what is going on inside and to see what kind of mind states we have. And so we lose mindfulness and we lose sight of the path. And we don't even actually know if our mind states are wholesome or unwholesome and what arises in our mind. And it's very, very difficult for us to practice. So it's, of course, much easier to meditate, much easier to look inwards and to understand our mind and to be able to develop our mind and to develop wholesome qualities if we see what is going on. And that means we need a place that is quiet, where we are not distracted, where we can just look inwards, and where the outside world doesn't constantly need our attention, where other people don't constantly talk to us, or where our mobile phone doesn't constantly need our attention, or where just too many things are going on. And so that doesn't mean, obviously, that everybody has to go into the forest and live the rest of their lives in a cave on a mountaintop. Even monastics don't really do that. Most monastics don't really do that. But it is important to just have time for ourselves where we can just reflect and meditate. And I think many of you maybe have made this experience already if you have gone to a meditation retreat, even if it is a group retreat, even if it's not a solitary retreat. On retreats, usually people keep silence, noble silence. People don't talk to each other. And even that much, even though the people are still there, if they don't talk to you, you have the opportunity to go into this inner stillness, this inner silence, because other people don't constantly need your attention, and you're not constantly getting input from random chit-chat that they are telling you, or even they're not telling you, but they're telling each other, and you just pass by and you have no choice but to listen in. But if everybody is quiet, then we have a chance to actually go inwards and focus on ourselves. So, and then we have the last point. Do I have any superhuman distinctions in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones, so that when my spiritual companions question me on my deathbed, I will not be embarrassed? Or here in the book, has my practice borne fruit with freedom or insight, so that at the end of my life, I need not feel ashamed when questioned by my spiritual companions? This should be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So here the question is, has my practice borne fruit? So have I attained anything in the practice? When the text here talks about a superhuman distinction, this refers usually to a jhana state, so a state of very deep samadhi, and especially it also refers to the fruits of the path, the noble attainments, so stream entry, once return, non-return, or arahantship. These are what is called the superhuman distinctions, and distinctions in knowledge and vision, so the development of wisdom, the development of insight, understanding reality as it actually is, understanding how our mind works, because it is through wisdom that we can abandon the defilements and ultimately get liberated. So superhuman distinctions talk about the samadhi attainments of the jhanas, and also about the wisdom attainments, the breakthroughs to stream entry up to arahantship. And of course, samadhi is very, very important, but samadhi alone doesn't lead us all the way to arahantship. It is wisdom ultimately that cuts through the defilements and makes us liberated. But of course, wisdom is very strongly helped by a mind that is still, so by deep samadhi attainments. And so this is what this text talks about. Have we actually attained any of these states that are worthy of the noble ones? So the noble ones, of course, are people who have already attained stream entry or something higher. And so the question is, have we actually become one of those noble people? Have we actually become a stream enterer or something higher on the path? So as we practice the Dhamma, obviously, ultimately, hopefully, we will make progress that is so advanced that we will eventually become stream enterers or become arahants. That, of course, takes time for most people. Some people have the karma or bring the good qualities, the good mental qualities, that can be quite quickly. But then also there's a reflection, eventually at the end of my life, would I feel ashamed if I haven't attained anything? And especially this question comes up maybe for monastics, because they have given their entire life to the Dhamma. So hopefully they will have gotten some kind of fruit of their practice. And here the idea is spiritual companions might question you on your deathbed. So for monastics, usually they don't speak about their attainments. Actually, we have a lot of monastic rules, Vinaya rules, around this question. And we are very, very strongly discouraged from talking about this. For example, if we claim to have one of these superhuman attainments and it was a lie, then this is considered so serious that we have to immediately disrobe. We are no longer a monk or a nun, and we cannot reordain anymore for our entire life. So this kind of lie is considered very, very seriously. But even if it is true, we shouldn't talk about it with lay people. The Vinaya technically allows for us to talk about this with other fully ordained monastics. But unless you have a very, very trustworthy teacher, it is usually very much discouraged from talking about this, because once you talk about this, obviously other people like to gossip, and this kind of information will just spread, and eventually everybody will know about it. And then what often happens is that there's a big hype, and especially in Asian countries, suddenly busloads full of people come to your monastery all the time because they want to see that person, and they want to make merit by offering random stuff. So the whole monastery is just swamped with people who don't really actually want to practice, but who just try to make noise and try to see the arahant, and it becomes like a zoo instead of like a practice community. And it's very, very distracting for the person in question, but it's also very distracting for the entire community, and nobody will really be able to practice properly if this kind of hype happens. So it's very, very rare that monastics would actually talk about those kind of attainments. But on the deathbed, it's a different matter, because you're about to die. So there's no more danger of creating this kind of hype. There's no more danger of actually creating an obstacle for your practice, because you're dying anyway. And so there can be some kind of tradition where sort of your spiritual companions, or maybe your own students, would question you if you have any kind of attainment, especially if you have been in robes for a long time, and if people have benefited a lot from your practice, and if you have a lot of students, they might be interested if their teacher has actually attained anything or not. And so if you have a lot of students, and if you have been ordained for a long time, it might be embarrassing for you if they ask you this question, and you have to say, well, actually my practice hasn't gone anywhere. So by having this reflection here, this again is a motivation for us to practice. And because especially for people who have been in monastic life for a long time, sometimes the original enthusiasm wanes away, and people might find it difficult to just keep up this motivation every single day to keep on practicing. Sometimes it can be like, oh, I've practiced for 50 years and there's still greed and anger and delusion in my mind. And or just people might become complacent, life in the monastery is whatever, too comfortable, or they're just too much used to the routines. There's nothing exciting happening. And so it's kind of easy for people to kind of become complacent and not be that motivated in practice. And so by reflecting in this way, this is a way to bring up motivation, to keep the practice fresh, and to keep the energy there, and the right effort there, and the right mindfulness, so that practice can actually develop and this kind of complacency doesn't set in. So one who has gone forth should often review these 10 things, or bhikkhus. These are the 10 dhammas to be reflected upon again and again by one who has gone forth. So this is the sutta on the 10 points to be reflected upon again and again. And as you see, those are, of course, applicable to monastics, but also very applicable to lay life with a few small modifications. So it can be very, very helpful and very, very important to reflect on this from time to time, so that we can see if our practice is going in the right direction, and also just keep us motivated, to bring up the energy, to bring up joy and happiness and inspiration in our practice. And for this reason, this is an extremely popular sutta in most monastic communities, and I think it's also very, very helpful for lay people. So at this point, we're going to end the sutta study for today. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the live chat, and I will see if I can answer them. So let's have a look. For the moment, I don't really see any question. I see a lot of people checking in. Good to see you all. Good to see so many Dhamma friends in the new year. Welcome, everybody. So I just see a lot of emojis, a lot of happy faces, and a lot of anjalis and hearts and flowers. So I'm assuming there is no question, but people enjoyed the talk. So I hope this gave you some inspiration for reflections, reflecting back on the last year and maybe making some good resolutions for the new year. And gave you some inspiration, some motivation for the practice. So for today, we will end with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So have a good rest of the day and have a good week. And see you all again next week. Take care.